Welcome to Out of Nowhere, where we talk with marketers, makers, and value creators about where they've been and where they're going next. Let's dive in. I'm Justin Watkins of Native Digital. Today we're talking Edtech with Will from Udemy, a global marketplace providing tools that learners, instructors, and enterprises need to achieve their goals and reach their full potential.
If I go back to my earliest part of my career, I actually had a goal right when I hit my career professionally in my early 20s. But by the age of 40, I wanted to be operating a P&L, either own my own company, running a business unit, but something that had a full view as to the way a business operated. I'm not really sure. I've thought about this, where that came from, other than, sounded like a really cool thing to do. Probably read it somewhere. And so I said, all right, that's going to be my goal. And as you would expect, and as most people do, I said, all right, to do that, I need to have stops, around the horn, if you will, and all the different functions that are involved. And so, early on, I did, even prior to that, operations related roles. I was in, distribution, warehousing. I mean, hands-on, this is a product, it has to get on a truck and it needs to get to a store before it can be sold. I, got involved in customer support issues to understand what that looks like and what are people unhappy about. I even dabbled in IT, which was probably my shortest and least productive career building choice. But, again, technology was, interweaves into every business process and enables everything, and when we were in the 7-Eleven related business and distribution, it was all about, what are customers wanting to buy? When are they wanting to buy it? How does things like weather, their demographic data influence that? And 7-Eleven Japan, which I was involved in, had this incredible POS system that captured all that information. And that was incredibly illuminating to me, because that showed to me what you can do with data. If you know that, women from ages 40 to 50 or 55 buy food at 2 p.m. and they're looking for this, that, you make sure you have the right quantities of those products in your stores. So in hindsight, it's like, well, of course, yeah, that's kind of basic, but then it was a pretty revolutionary thing. And I actually then did market. The very last thing, it took me a full decade. I didn't get into a sales career until I was in my 30s. I was in a market research position in a company called Forrester Research, and I was scared out of my wits. I loved being behind the scenes and not talking to customers. And when the first person said, "All right, you ready to handle a quota?" and I was like, "Ugh," and then like, well, 50% of your income is going to be driven by that. And I'm like, well, guess what? I hit 88% of my quota. I will never forget my first year. I did not do very well, and I was having pipeline reviews at home that were worse than the ones at the office about how's it looking this month. This, are you going to put money on the table, or food in? And it wasn't quite that bad, but nonetheless, that was really, really hard. And did some marketing along that as well. But at that point is when I began to realize that, all right, there really is something to this concept of, not everybody's good at everything, and the age-old axiom of surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, who excel at their function and are only going to amplify the results you deliver, makes sense. But I also hit my groove and continued to progress in my sales career to leadership and director and regional ownership and those kinds of things. So I got into an entrepreneurial bug and launched my own first company, which was something I had, wanted to do. And I can tell you more about that, but I guess I've been doing a lot of talking here. So let me stop for a second and see what kind of further questions you have.
I'm curious, you said that you set a goal to have your own P&L by 40. Is that right?
Correct.
And what year did you have your first P&L?
At 40.
Did you really? Okay.
Yes, I just made it, but I pushed it, but I wanted it to happen because it's the single longest range plan I've ever had in my career, in my lifetime, for that matter. I mean, I thought I'd get married and have kids, but I locked in on this magical 40 number, and it succeeded about a month before my actual birthday came across. So It wasn't a big P&L, it was a few $1 million, which is not insignificant, but it was mine. There were lots of line items on there I didn't understand, because finance is one area I never went into. Probably in hindsight, should have gotten a little bit stronger at reading a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement and income. But I always sort of had good people around me that excelled in that. And honestly, that stuff just bored me to death. So I didn't really want to spend any time on it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've always felt like if it's boring to me and not interesting, I think I'm involved in enough stuff. I think I give myself a pass if
Right.
it's really boring. But if there's enough stuff to be interested in, like just pursue that, because you're going to pursue it with passion and you'll probably be good at it. So
Yes. And I never had a finance person who was not willing to pull me back when I was painting outside the lines, as they say, not illegally. I meant just like, well, you're not really looking at the profit margins on this, or you're looking at the cost of sales. You're, well above and what our internal, benchmark should be here. How are we going to get that under control? So it was always helpful to have people that pointed out the guardrails.
so you found yourself, it sounds like you took a bit of a generalist's path to find
Yeah.
sales, and then you found sales and growth, and have really stuck with that. Do you, looking back, if you were to change anything in your career, would you make it more generalist and have dabbled in other things, or would you have tried to get into sales earlier and doubled down and been more of a specialist?
That's a good question. I have thought a little bit about that. I've had various influences in my life you know, who drilled into me that, be an expert, be a specialist in one area. That will set you apart. But, I've met great, engineers who've transitioned into, great leaders and CEOs. So there is no one size fits all answer to that. I do think, I look at efficiencies and improvement that for sure my path was a little meandering. I probably could have chopped 20% out of there. There was a few stops that were too long, or they weren't really that productive, or I learned what I needed to do after 6 months, but I stayed in it for 2 years. And so most definitely, I think I could have compressed and accelerated parts of that. Because when I got to being in a sales and growth and fast growth, which is what is a subsegment of growth, because there are those that like 15 and 20%. There are others that are, excited by 80 or 100 or 200%. And I found myself, I'm sort of the adrenaline junkie of sales. I like the triple digit kind. That's what, keeps me motivated. And that is a different set of skills. And that's something that I didn't plan for or account for. And it took more time to get an understanding of what that looks like, what that requires, and be able to execute on it. And so I've had some swings and misses in terms of pulling that off. I'm pretty comfortable. I know what I'm doing at the moment.
Well, you're touching on a topic that I think is relevant right now, because we're seeing, we're in the midst of the Great Resignation. We're seeing people
Yes.
job hop from place to place in all industries. In some cases, a short stint is a short stint, and they're moving on to the next one. It might be another short stint. And so I can relate to what you're saying about the idea of, like, there's times where I stayed 2 years, but I probably could have wrapped it up in 6 months. At the same time, I think there's this a complete what's completely underrated is sometimes digging in and getting through a difficulty in a non-ideal situation is probably the best learning you can ever do in your career. I mean, can you think of a time in your career where a very non-ideal situation actually led to better learning that benefited you later on?
Yeah, sure. I talk about one. So a company I was at, Lux Research, I was shipped off to Asia to open up our business there. I literally was a single employee in a WeWork office space, and had a desk, and when I left after 3 years, it was 20 million, or sorry, not 20 people, and a business that was 28% of our total business, and it was 5% when I started. And so I had hired all these people. I had opened offices in China and Korea and Japan. Had a pretty broad role, because unlike being in the US, I had to oversee even finance side of things and payroll and also got to buy the toilet paper and snacks for our office in Singapore because there was no one else to do that. And even the research and the content, I gave speeches on things that I wasn't really very knowledgeable about, but we didn't have a marketing person and we didn't have enough sort of leads in terms of content there. And it was going really well. And then for family reasons, I had children that were going to be going into high school, and we're like, I think it's time to come back to the US because it's a topic of a different conversation about whether kids, where they should be educated in your network and where you go to school and all of that. But we made the decision to move back, hired a replacement, and then, our president said, CEO said, all right, well, you did a great job. Why don't you come back to the US? And I'm like, okay. And it says, well, the US team is struggling at the moment. I just want to let you know that you're not inheriting a rocket ship. You're inheriting a sputtering engine here that we can't quite figure out. So in fact, you're getting this opportunity because I think, you can, apply some magic that you learned and take that on. And so I said, all right. And I jumped in, and I all of a sudden realized that there were a whole host of problems that I hadn't been able to see on the outside. But what I learned was, there's a subset of skills and activities that, cross cultures and cross teams. And then there are some, very particular things that happen in Asia or North America or, Latin America for that matter, that don't happen elsewhere. But I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I'm glad I did it because it gave me some of the sort of turnaround chops and that whole skill set of assessing people, having to let people go, assessing processes, and that is not something I had done before. So I'm glad I got the chance to do that and get things, turned around back on the right track. But it was a lot of pressure very quickly, as that was nearly 50% of our business. So it was a step up in terms of responsibility, and the board had a particular spotlight and understood the US market a lot better than Asia, so they had a lot more advice.
You're touching on a piece that's a big part of your career, which is a big part of your career is Japan, the APAC region. Yes. international business. How did that come about, and how has that benefited you? Because international business and thinking globally is becoming more and more important every single day. The past 20 months has really proved that, I think, accelerated that in many ways.
It definitely has. Yeah, the international component, something I don't know where that came in. I started traveling internationally, I think I was 8 years old when I was on a hockey exchange program to Canada, which is not relevant to my business, but that kind of sparked a fire, ignited something, a travel bug. And, I went to school in Scotland for a year. Then I went out to California. While I was in California, I wanted to go somewhere else. So I went to Japan. That was the 80s. It was where the, massive growth was happening. So I got kind of guided into Japan versus China versus, Korea and other places I looked at. But I just felt that, getting a perspective outside of my own. And part of that for me started off, I grew up in New England, and New England has a particular sort of style of people and the way they operate. And I was surrounded by them, and going to school in California and going to school in the UK, recognized that people perceive themselves and, citizens of other countries very differently. And that just kind of made a lot of sense to me, and said, I really want to get better at understanding that. So I went off to Japan, absolutely fell in love with the place, learned the language, not really expecting to, because I didn't study it before I went, but it clicked for me. And at that point I came back, and I had a whole bunch of job offers and people interested in me that previously were closed doors. And I went, okay, you just differentiated yourself in a huge way. And I literally, doubled my income expectations in reality overnight because of my time in Japan and looking at my peers and what they were doing, because there weren't many people who spoke Japanese, even back in the day in Los Angeles. And so once I did figure that out, I said, let's do more of this, because that's only going to continue to differentiate you. So when it got to the sort of sales, but even operations and things I was doing, I always align myself towards international business. And the first major job I got was with Mitsui and Company, which is at the time, $150 billion Japanese trading firm that had operations in 150 countries. So it was, I couldn't help but think and, work in a global, but as a result, I've told all my kids they have to speak a second language at some point. I said, every one of you needs to live internationally. You just need to get that perspective. And back to your sort of original question, the world we're in now is so much more global. Whether even if you're in Kansas City versus on a coastal city, it's still a global marketplace. We compete, for talent globally now. You can't avoid that. In the content delivery business or education space where I operate now, competitors come from all walks of life and all geographies. And so to ignore the global trends and global competition is at your own peril, because they will come and wipe you out before you even see what hits you or see what's hitting you.
Yeah, it's for sure. It's the globalization has been moving along this whole time, and it just accelerated a significant amount. You're now at Udemy right now.
Yes.
And I would love to know what drew you to their mission and the goals that they're setting out. I know Japan and the APAC region it continues to play a role with what you do there, but what was it that was sort of magnetic and drew you in?
The magnetic thing is actually their, the mission and the origin story. So it's, improving lives through learning. It's a sort of a simple concept, but it's an incredibly powerful one, because Aaron Bali was one of the three founders, and all Turkish, grew up in a remote village in Turkey and was super smart, but in a very poor village, and his intelligence quickly outstripped the ability of his instructors and local school teachers to help him. He was fortunate enough that his parents were able to provide him with a computer and access to the internet. And, he was all of a sudden able to take courses and learn from people in a different location. And, the light went off for him and said, everybody should have, access to this. Everybody should have the ability to better themselves, and it should be democratized. And what was really fascinating was that their model is not to go out and publish their own content, but to find experts in the field who want to publish a course on that, and they act as a marketplace in between, and they use a curated subset for sort of corporate subscriptions. But that they completely turned the publisher model on its head and said the biggest constraint is actually the biggest opportunity, which is to make everybody in the world a teacher and everybody in the world a learner. So all of a sudden, I look at this and, the proverbial total available market is like, well, it's the globe at this point. I mean, there literally is nobody who's not a potential customer, whether you're in the government or a corporation, or whether you're a 5-person company or just an individual person who wants to learn how to speak a foreign language. And so when I looked at what their mission was, and I had never had a chance to be in a mission-oriented company, I have a sort of environmental bent to me. So I'm like, wow, so we're not polluting the country, we're not producing any products, we're not creating, so we're literally just trying to provide content. So allow anybody to get any job or learn any skill that they want. And I said, that's, all right, that's a game changer. And then on top of it, as we've talked about all along, Asia Pacific was an area that they were focusing on and looking for some, strength and leaders to help them. And then third, they're a Silicon Valley company, and it's all about growth and very fast growth. And when I understood where they were trying to get and how soon they were trying to get, I was like, all right, this is it. This is a trifecta of things that I'm just not going to find anywhere else. So I said, I'm along for the ride, and it's been extraordinarily rewarding so far. And we've got a long ways to go yet.
I fully agree there's a lot of investment in EdTech right now, rightfully
Yes.
so. I think we've all realized that some of the traditional models, we saw the cracks in that a little bit more, I think, the past several months. It reminds me a little bit of someone asked me years ago, if you had a chance to invest in Netflix versus YouTube, which would you pick? I'm like, that's easy. It's going to be YouTube, because I'm always going to pick the one where it's more participatory. People can generate their own content, and it doesn't have the scale as much of a scaling problem. As long as the marketplace has a good value prop for either side, it's a bit limitless, right? Like you can scale up very fast. And by the way, that content's much more affordable than these big deals that Netflix is going out and signing. So it seems like it's similar, right? In the ed tech world, I love to see all of these different options out there, but you've got a great model and a lot of momentum behind you.
Yeah, and I mean, the incredible part is, we're providing income streams for a lot of people who, have day jobs and, just do this sort of on the side. Or we have, there's stories of people that, are at home because they have to take care of a family member, and, they, produce a course on sourdough bread, and the next thing they know, that thousands and tens of thousands of people have looked at it, and it's become, a standalone business that they can support themselves. And so to actually be enabling people to learn a skill in an environment when they were at home and had more time than they might have previously had, but at the same time, people stuck at home, we provided them, an opportunity to earn money, and that's like, how much better does it get? And we just have to, match those people together, which is what the marketplace does. So it's just extraordinary, the impact that we're having around the world here, and it really is around the world. It's not a US based business at all.
So as I understand it, part of your charge is market expansion and within new international markets.
Sure.
What would you say is the value of brand when you're moving into these markets and looking at, from what I understand, is enterprise sales?
Yes.
For the most part, what's the value of brand, name recognition, that type of thing that marketing can do to support enterprise sales as you're going into these new markets, new countries?
I guess in a word, it's massive is the value. I mean, it is a part of every conversation. Where we're operating in Asia, if you don't have a brand, you don't get a conversation. The door doesn't open. You don't have that initial meeting. And so everything from, kind of the top of funnel activities to just making people aware of who you are, let alone the service you provide, is absolutely critical, because that reputation, both even on individuals, but particularly on the corporate side, you've got a lot of very traditional clients who want to buy from someone that they've heard of. They want to buy from someone who's seen as a thought leader, and a brand that they can trust. And so, we operate with strategic partners in many of our countries, and the single reason we do that is because they have well-established brands in the countries which they operate, and as a result, clients will come to them and say, all right, this was interesting, what is this Udemy thing? All right, but we trust you, so we'll take a meeting and evaluate the service. Because when you get into education and upskilling, or providing learning and digital transformation, you're talking about companies' core asset, which is their human resources. You're not talking about software upgrades to their computers and infrastructure. You are literally talking about, you're messing with and hopefully enhancing the people that run their business. And most people are smart enough at this point to recognize that is the core of what makes them who they are. So there's a huge level of trust. Something I didn't actually appreciate, because I'm like, oh, this is just ed tech. We're just helping people. It's like, no, we're giving you information about our employees, and we're putting, their career progressions, in your hands. So they take it very seriously. So brand, critical. We and places where we don't have that brand awareness, we get their less exhilarating results.
In terms of the past, let's say year and a half, are there new challenges or new opportunities that you're seeing, or there landscape shifts as it relates to enterprise sales or even international sales that you've noticed some trends, or you've noticed some changes, whether it's at Udemy or other places?
Sure.
What's caught your attention? What are some things that are on your radar?
Well, I mean, one trend that started but accelerated, I'd say, in the last few years, is sort of the the buyer's education before they come and talk to you. And so I think part of it is also been with COVID and people at home, but the amount of research that they have done before they ever reach out and say hello to you, or let alone ask you a question, and sort of that intent, or I think someone talked about the dark funnel and those kinds of things, and is so important. And so that and that's back to the brand and the positioning. And so they have formed an impression of you long before they've ever talked to you. And that's caused a couple of ripple effects. Its most important thing is you need to be thinking much more aggressively about what your footprint, what's your collateral, what all that stuff looks like. Because if it's not good, you're kind of dead in the water. It doesn't matter how good your salesperson is, because you're never going to get anywhere. And second, it really changes the tenor and the way your sales team has to reach out and engage with clients. Because if they start to jump into sort of features and functions and all that kind of stuff, the client's like, no, I can do all that. I don't need you for any of that information. It's like, why you? Why should I even be having this conversation? And so, and I won't go into lots of the sort of sales methodology, but so much more, sort of consultative as a broadest category, and more about, this is all about the buyer's journey and not about the seller's journey anymore. And a lot of salespeople, I think, got caught flat-footed on that. I don't think they got proper training on that, and they don't lose deals because they only have one motion, which is to a little bit of some of that we call the show up and throw up approach, and that doesn't close deals. In many cases, you're presented with an RFP and like, just I'm going to fill out the boxes as you talk to me. So and it's not necessarily the right way to buy, but that is a very dramatic shift. Second big shift, we don't need a face-to-face meeting anymore. I mean, I am happy. I do this all day long. You do this all day long. I do this internationally all evening long. I get in front of, and they're like, oh, and they're like, no, we can just keep doing this. We don't need to shake hands with you. We don't need to look you any more in the face than I am right now. And you can do that in places like where I operate in Japan and Korea and China, where everybody said, oh, it had to be in person. Well, actually, it does not. And that's been a dramatic shift, because it requires you to be a lot more focused on what you're trying to get accomplished at each step of the process, because you get targeted windows. But it's actually been more helpful because you can send videos to people. You can do a lot of activity. You can record your presentation to someone, and they can share it with their colleagues. So you actually can, I find, compress some of the cycle times, because you don't have to gather everybody in the room. It's like, all right, it's going to be 3 months before I can get these 12 people in the room together for a 90-minute review of your proposal. You can do this kind of much more in a piecemeal basis and get to the end result you're looking for, which is closing a deal.
That's one of my favorite things about the change over the past year and a half or so is not having to fly yourself across the country for a 30-minute meeting and talk about environmentalism, right? Like that's
right.
A huge sustainability perk that we all realized. And it really just took everybody agreeing like, oh yeah, we can operate this way. Nothing replaces in person. Everybody loves it, but you also don't need to assemble from across the globe just to have a meeting anymore, right?
Correct. And it's frankly, it was a crutch for people. Like, well, they're in a room and it's like, well, I've got your focused attention. They live for the plane ride and the big dinners and maybe even golf, and some of those stuff still kind of happens and other things. But most people are now like, all right, let's dial in, have a call, explain what I want, and move on. It's frankly far more efficient and far more environmentally friendly. But that's another trend that's thrown off a lot of people who are actually like, well, they're more productive whether they want it to be or not, or they've exposed flaws in their own system, because they're not wasting all this time, whether even commuting to an office, let alone flying to see customers. But it has hurt the events and the conference business, and I have yet to see an event online that really comes close to what you get as an in-person experience. I hope that happens, and there's lots of interesting technology and money going there, but it really hasn't got there. And the efficiency you can have if you can hit 10 or 15 clients and prospects and have internal conversations at a show somewhere is something that I look forward to being able to resume doing.
Absolutely. It makes us, I think, appreciate the stuff that we want back and then
Yes.
rethink the things that we didn't actually need to do in the first place.
Yes.
So yeah, we're
Right. Yes.
everything's getting evaluated at this point.
Everything is getting evaluated. You're absolutely right. Office space is getting evaluated. We don't need dedicated desks for people anymore. It's, log in, sign up for desk 127, and that's what you get, and it's there and it's cleaned afterwards, but it's a simpler. And people now, I think, when they get together, are a lot more thoughtful and intentional about what the conversation and what they should do differently if it's in person versus in a virtual environment. And I think there's a lot, less sort of time wasting going on because people are recognizing how precious face-to-face meetings are now.
One of the things I love about the EdTech space is that it's just easy to really invest yourself and your team and these growth efforts because you really believe in it, right? Like you see this innovation and you see how it helps people, and our job is to distribute that out and make sure it gets out there. And so even if we are adrenaline junkies on growth numbers, we also believe in the purpose behind it. But as you look at, what Udemy is doing today and in 5 years, and just the category in general, EdTech in general, like what motivates you about that? You spoke about it a little bit, but what do you want to see? What do you predict will happen? What do you want to see happen in the EdTech category moving forward that continues to drive you and your team?
That's a great question, and not a simple one to answer, or one that I've got all of it. I mean, one of the things that continues to motivate us that we look at is the breadth of the content that we can provide, because and the way we provide it, right? And that gets into the duration of things and the whether it's interactive or asynchronous or synchronous, and there's all kinds of other bells and whistles. But learning in the flow of work, which is a phrase people sort of talk about, but doing things in the flow of work, it's like, how do you continue to give people the content they want in the format they want at the time that they want? And so what I'm excited about is, and we're working hard at this, but lots of other companies and well-known technology firms that you would think have nothing to do with technology are looking at this space, because they recognize that if you can figure out how to put that into the sort of flow of work, and then ultimately the flow of life, because we look at, what are the learnings happening when people are outside of work, because that's a big part of when consumption of our content happens. And so that's what's really interesting and exciting, is all the different ways that we will, again, provide that the content people want the way they want it and how they want it. And it won't all be us, but there'll be this much more complicated kind of technology sort of stack and experience for people. But the flip side of that is, and it's even inside of our own company, chief learning officers, we have one, chief HRO officers, chief people officers are now thinking very differently about how to create that experience for their own employees. And back to your great, sort of resignation, a lot of what we do is targeted at, retention, targeted at decreasing departures, unwanted departures at least. And so I'm really excited about what the future of our business looks like over the next few years, and the future of how companies do this, because the speed of change continues to accelerate, and the speed of technology continues to accelerate. People have to take learning in a very different proactive approach. Before, it was like, continuing education. All right, I'm going to go off to my event. I got to get my 12 hours and tick the box, and you come back. And it's like, you can still do that, but I think you're leaving so much on the table if that is your approach. I mean, every day, I'm learning something, or I'm working and someone said something, and I'm like, and I make a note, and we all have a little action item list, and you're like, but how do you take that? Well, I'd like to know more about that, to here's a really easy way to learn about that, and then consume that, right? And that's the I think, a little bit of the still unfigured out piece of this thing, because there's all these micro opportunities to learn and grow. And if you don't create that environment for employees, I think they leave. But if you have that environment for employees, then they want to stay, because they are, 8 hours, whatever they're working, goes by instantaneously, but they did their job and they learned a bunch of things, and they're a better human and they're a better employee, at the end of the day, because of, what you're providing. And that, I don't know, that just, you can tell, that excites me to no end, to be a part of that, sort of transformation of people.